Welcome to addition and multiplication properties. I'm going to start off by talking about commutative property. And what I want you to think about here is commuting or moving. Okay, now commutative property means to commute or to move. That means you have numbers. Now, let's try to do an addition property. Let's just say 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals. Now if we use commutative property, what we can do is that we are moving the numbers. So we're going to have a 2 plus, let's say, 3 plus 1. So, do you see the way the numbers have moved? That's using commutative property. We can also use commutative property in multiplication problems. So if we have 2 times 3 equals 3 times 2. So as you can tell, we have moved our numbers, and that's what commutative property means. It means moving the numbers, and that's what you need to remember for commutative. Like to commute means to move. It's like when your parents drive to work, that's called commuting. Well, that's moving. Now commutative property comes in really handy when we think about complementary numbers. Complementary numbers. Now, complementary numbers are numbers like 1 plus 9 equals 10. Those are complementary numbers. And 2 plus 8 equals 10. And 3 plus 7 equals 10. And 4 plus 6 equals 10, and 5 plus 5 equals 10. Those are complementary numbers. That means these numbers work really well when we're adding things up, so that we can help us to take complementary numbers and we can use them to add things together. Now, why would we need to know this? Well, let's say we have 4 plus 3 plus 6 plus 7 equals. Well, with that, you can say, well, let's see, 4 plus 3 is 7, 7 plus 7 is 14, and you see how it becomes more difficult? Well, let's use our commutative property, and let's put our numbers that are complementary together. So which numbers would those be? Well, yes, the 4 plus 6, that would be great. And then we have 3 plus 7. So what we do is we take those, and 4 plus 6 is 10. Bring down this addition sign. And 7 plus 3 is 10. And so we have the answer 20. So as you can see, that's a lot easier way to add them if we just use commutative property to do that. So that's commutative property, and that's how it works so well to help us in these addition problems. Now let's say we have another problem like 3 times 4 times k, and that equals k. Let's see. Let's say we have a 2 here times 4 times 3. All right, so what do we have? Well, let's see. We have a 3 here, right here, and we have a 3 here, right? Okay. And then we have a 4 here and a 4 here. So what do you think k equals? Yeah, that's right. K equals 2. It's right here in the middle, isn't it? So as you can see, commutative property is very helpful when we are not only adding numbers, but when we're multiplying or when we're trying to find the variable. And remember, k here is our variable. Okay, so that is commutative property. Commutative property. Okay, the next one I want to tell you about is called associative property. Now, what you need to remember here, and this is important, is grouping and regrouping. Now, what do we mean by grouping and regrouping? Well, let's start with our, we have 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals, well, we have our parentheses. And anytime you see a parentheses, that means grouping. Okay? So we have our grouping of 2 plus 3. Here's our group right here, 2 plus 3. So 2 plus 3 is our group. Now on the other side, we're going to regroup. Okay? So let's regroup by, we're going to just put the same numbers in the same order, but we're going to put the parentheses in with 2 different numbers. And we have regrouped. So originally we have the original group, and then we regrouped over here. And that's what associative property does. It's regrouping. Now, how does that work in, let's say, multiplication? It works pretty much the same way. We have, let's use our 2 again, times 3 times 4. And what would our group be? Our group would be 2 times 3. And to regroup, we have our same problem on this side, same numbers. So what do? We're going to regroup by grouping the 3 and the 4 together. Now, that just means we're using what? Parentheses. Yeah, we're going to use our parentheses. We're going to put our parentheses around 2 numbers on one side of the equal sign and on 2 different numbers on the other. Now, the reason why this is important is so that we group things together to do the right operation first. So in this case, we would be doing 2 times 3 would be 6 times 4, and over here we'd be doing the 3 times 4, and this is supposed to be a multiplication sign. Yeah, got that one wrong. 3 times 4 is 12, and then we're going to multiply it by 2. You see how that worked? So it does give us different numbers, but it leads to the same answer. So grouping and regrouping is what you have to remember when it comes to associative property. Okay, now I wanted to teach you something else about associative property. Now when we think of associative property, what are we thinking of? Yes, we're thinking of grouping and regrouping. Right. Now, grouping and regrouping. Let's take a look at a problem. Let's say it's 2 times 3 times 4. Okay, we have our group here. And over here we have 2 times 3 times 4. And we're going to group these 2 together. Okay, so we have our groups, right? Now, we can also use, let's say we use A for 2, and we're going to use B for 3 and C for 4. Now, we could write it like that, where you have the A right outside the parentheses, and what that means, that really means multiply. Okay? So, we have our A, B, and C, and they're grouped together like that. Then we have our A times B times C. And here, we're going to regroup by having A times B. We don't need to have this here. We can get rid of that, because this means multiply. Okay, now another way we could write this multiplication problem is we could say, let's say 2 and 3k. Okay, that means that we're multiplying 2 times 3 and 2 times k, or we're multiplying 3 times k and then multiplying it by 2. So we have this. Now let's regroup. Let's regroup it with the 2 and the 3 on the inside. Now there we could use a dot in the middle. This means multiply. That's what that means. I'll put it in yellow for you so you remember. That means multiply. Okay? And then we have our k out here. Okay? So we can do it that way as well. So that means 2 times 3, and then we're going to multiply it by k. Or we could use our distributed property and multiply k times 3 and then k times 2. So that's associative property. You need to remember that it's grouping and regrouping. Now we're up to identity property. Identity property. Now the identity property, I drew some mirrors here. And the reason why I drew those is that I want you to think of identity as like looking at yourself in the mirror. So when you look at yourself in the mirror, what do you see? Well, you see yourself, right? So let's say we have an addition problem. Now let's say we have the number 5. The 5 is in the mirror. How do we see, what do we have to do to this addition problem to keep the identity or the same number or the same image in the mirror? What do we have to do to the 5? Well, we would have to add 0 to get 5. So we have 5 plus 0 equals 5, and that's called identity property. Now on our multiplication, it's a little bit different. Because what do we do? Let's use 5 again. What do we do to our 5 to keep it a 5? Do we multiply by 0? No, that wouldn't work. It would give us 0, wouldn't it? This, we would need to multiply by 1. That's right. We have to multiply by 1 to get 5. So for the 5 to maintain its identity, to stay the same, we have to multiply it by 1. And this is called identity property. So as you see, identity property in addition is adding by 0, and in multiplying, we're multiplying by 1. Okay, so that's an important thing to remember for identity property. It's when the number sees itself. That's what identity property is. It's the number seeing itself in the mirror. Alright, now we're going to talk about zero property. Now zero property is only in multiplication. It's only in multiplication. So we have our, let's use our 5 again, we like 5. And we have to multiply it by something to get 0. So what could we do? What could we multiply the 5 by to get 0? Right, we have to multiply it by 0. We'll make 0. Now you see, the reason why it doesn't work in addition is that if we started with a 1 and we added like 0, well, we still have our 1. And so this is not. What is this? This is identity property. So identity property is when the number starts as a certain number and it maintains its identity. So that's what we just talked about. But in zero property, this is a multiplication. This is a multiplication property. It's only for multiplication, and it's when you multiply a number by 0. It's called zero property. Okay? Very good. I love math.